It is Saturday, July 26th. It's another edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. And I can't tell you all enough how much we sincerely appreciate your watching, listening, giving us feedback, because there's so many other options that you have with your time, but you choose to watch us. You know, Patrice Onwuka co-hosts a show on WMAL radio. Patricia, how much has radio changed? What are the topics that people are interested in? You're in a position where you influence people, and it's so important for people to continue to watch you. They've got to believe in your facts. They've got to believe in your credibility, that you don't have some hidden agenda. Talk about that space that you're in where you actually get a chance to interact with everyday people.
Well, it's good to see you, Armstrong and Rob. Radio is such a unique beast because I think talk radio for decades has been bringing interesting news, interviews with people, and then listening to the listeners, listening to the areas to hear what's on people's minds. And a lot of what people want to know is, why is the media biased? Not just radio, but particularly television news, newspapers, magazines, a lot of the established old guard legacy media. And they find those sources less and less credible, which has opened up a huge opportunity for those in new media who are, have their podcasts, have long form discussions, to be able to dig into the details and to cover the stories that, a lot of news organizations choose to omit or overlook or cover with their own spin. Radio, we also have very high standards that we have to meet. The FCC will slap us really quickly if we are using curse words, using profanity, using inappropriate language, but also we hold ourselves to a higher standard when it comes to what we, whether it's something we see on Twitter is actually true, and we're going to share that with our listeners. A lot of times things pop off on Twitter and they turn out to be absolutely false, and so we have a responsibility, even if we share something that turns out to be inaccurate, to go back and say, you know what, folks, we got this wrong. Here's what we know. This is the truth.
Rob, I know you operate out of the Heritage Foundation, which has become really a nuisance because every few days out of the week, you have these stage protesters on this bullhorn raising all kind of sand against the Heritage Foundation, and we have to sit across the street and listen to it. But right now, what I've seen now, that it happens at 4 p.m. every day, but they have all these law enforcement out there, Metropolitan Police. I go out there and try to interview them, these neo-Nazi flag, referring to you guys as a Nazi organization. As someone who was editor-in-chief of the Daily Signal, someone who understands content and the importance of truth, how do you, as a journalist and also someone who's over at the Heritage Foundation, how do you deal with this craziness every week?
Well, Armstrong, I've seen your reporting on this, and I appreciate the fact that you're trying to have a conversation with them. I think that it's actually what you're doing that is what the viewers and what the audience wants, and that is the authenticity. They are seeing you in an unedited video, talk to them, and they see a little bit of the behind the scenes. I mean, you maneuvering and trying to get into a position where there's not a bullhorn blowing right into your face or something. And so there's a variety of things that I think that the audience wants these days, and they don't necessarily want a perfectly packaged segment. They want to see with their own eyes what the journalist or the reporter is seeing. And so that's what we try to do at the Daily Signal. We don't hide the fact that we are a conservative news outlet. We are a mission-driven organization, which by that I mean there are certain topics that we pick and choose to cover. We're not just reacting to events that are taking place across the globe, although we do some of that, but there are certain topics, as to your question to Patrice, that we know resonate with our audience and we want to see action on. I'd say immigration and the deep state and all of those various things that the audience tends to react to are topics that we pay particular attention to. And so I think that that's probably what is annoying some of the protesters and others who've showed up on the doorstep. They don't like the fact that we are effective and that they're seeing results in Washington, D.C. and state capitals.
Patrice, you host, I don't know whether you're on Daily. Are you on Daily?
Every Friday and some Thursdays, like this morning,
okay.
5 a.m. to 9 a.m.
So obviously, I'm making assumptions here. There are many across the country that have lost trust in the White House on this Jeffrey Epstein issue in terms of being transparent and the things that they said they would do, which would separate them from the last administration. But what is on your audience mind? What are the topics? And listen, and because these audiences no longer trust mainstream media outlets, and there's this erosion of trust as a result of bias, corporate interests, or something deeper in our media ecosystem, what is it that you do different? And what is it that your audience is interested in? What are their topics?
Yeah, so we cover national, but really we cover local, and we bring the national to the local level. So, you know, our audience is here in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and obviously a lot of federal issues. For example, the Trump administration's first 60 days and a lot of the right sizing of federal government hits our audience very directly. They may be contractors or federal workers, and they want to know, they want to hear from members of Congress who are passing legislation, what this means for them directly. Right now, when it comes to the Epstein files, I think the administration, they have an opportunity here through transparency to release, as you know, whatever is still left to be seen. I think there were some missteps, though. Let's be honest here. When Pam Bondi suggested that there was a lot for her to review, and these kind of client dossier, or maybe a list. Maybe the word list is not accurate, but there was an expectation that fueled a lot of interest, and there are a lot of people, podcasters, a lot of commentators who have built huge followings and reputations around Jeffrey Epstein, or around the idea of powerful men and women who have different rules and play by different rules and are able to influence politics to protect them from some of the worst crimes. And so that's an issue that we've covered. But hey, today we are, on Thursday, we covered the Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, talking about and releasing formally classified information on what happened with the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration in 2016, and how, starting with the Obama administration, the FBI, former FBI director, former CIA director, under the direction of President Barack Obama, released information and tried to create what seemed to have been a collusion between former President, or now President Trump, and Russian President Putin to affect the election, and how that all really was just made up. And so that's something that our audience is fired up about, because we want to understand who in our intelligence community, who in our federal force is really working against the will of the people being who they elect every 4 years.
So, Rob, let me come to this. And Patricia makes a very interesting observation here. I would ask how much of the responsibility falls on the journalists themselves versus the platform that they use. Because I think how the media has become so divisive and have become a source not necessarily for good is because I believe that conservatives and liberals have much more in common. The freedom of the individual, there's a role that government plays in people's lives, and you got to be compassionate and sensitive in the things that you do, whether it's including trimming government. But what these platforms will do, because they want to get clicks, they want to get likes, and they want to get people to go viral, they'll put the extreme radical left and the extreme radical right and give them a platform, because they know they're more divisive and they're not held to the same standard of truth as someone like you and Patricia are held to. So what role does the platform itself plays in this versus the journalists?
Sure, that you make an excellent point there, and I think that's why you have seen when you have polling these poll numbers that show that the country is more divided than ever. But ultimately, when you dig down, Armstrong, you're right. There's a lot of common ground between individuals, neighbors who might have different voting patterns, but on a whole host of issues can agree that we probably need to have some changes and reforms to the way that our government works in order for things to be sustainable for the future. And so, who is ultimately to blame? Probably social media plays a big part of it. And I say that because they've created these bubbles that we tend to react to commentary that we may be more inclined to support or agree with, and you're not necessarily then exposed to different points of view and perspectives. That's certainly how Facebook and Instagram and so many other platforms operate, and they've been effective at that. They've made a huge sums of money from advertisers by skewing the algorithms in that particular direction. I mean, I see it in my own X feed, right? I mean, I tend to see people who are conservative more so than have different perspectives on the world. And one thing I do want to go back to, because Armstrong, you have a lot of experience in local news, Patrice as well. There are these challenges that we're talking about here, but there's a lot of good that's happening, particularly when it comes to local journalism. And I think that that's the distinction that I'd make. Armstrong, as divisive as things can be in Washington, D.C. and among the political leaders, when you come down to some of the local issues and the civic responsibility that so many of these individuals have, I think that there probably is a bright spot. And that's where you still see people relying on local newspapers or local radio stations to get news and information that is critical for them to function as a civil society.
You know, I'm going to come back. I'll tell you this story. This morning, on my way to the studio, I saw, so many, what you would consider to be, and I'm not saying the proverbial you, migrants, whatever you want to call them, out working in their yellow jackets, in their hard hats, working. And then I said to myself, wow, you would assume that everybody has been deported. But there's still people who are working, who are legal, who are ethical, who are moral. But to listen to the narratives, unless you see it, it gave me a reality check. And so I said to myself, we only tell the negative side of this story. There are so many people in this country legally, and they're working. The economy continues to hum on, but you get so caught up in this dark place, you think that anybody who comes out at night, comes out at Home Depot, comes out anywhere, somehow or another ICE is capturing them and either have them in a holding cell or they're ready to deport them. And that's just not all the narrative. I want to talk about this and what we create for people to put them in this dark hole where there's no light, and we see everything is dark and no good, and America's falling off the cliff. We'll be back. So, Rob, respond to the fact that I saw people working this morning. Respond to the fact that not all kids are being transgender. Not everybody is having an abortion. Not everybody is killing and looting and maiming people on the streets. There's a lot of good that still goes on in America, not because of, but in spite of.
Armstrong, there is, and I think it's one of those scenarios where, in journalism school, you learn that if it bleeds, it leads. And those are the types of stories that the news media tends to focus on. And I don't know if I have a solution for you on how we change that and tell more of the good news stories. I can tell you that when I used to co-host our podcast, we would do a good news segment where we tried to find something positive happening in the world and share with our audience that good news. Because naturally, as you've indicated, there are a lot of things that we should be celebrating. There are a small percentage of individuals who identify as transgender, and then disproportionately in so many of these legacy media outlets, and even in Hollywood studios these days, it seems, those stories take a significant amount of time and attention. And I don't know why that is, other than the fact that they're trying to push a certain agenda on the American people. There is probably a propaganda element to that as well, and we're led to believe that this is an epidemic in our country, when in fact maybe it's not.
So let me share this with you, Patrice, which I think is important. I don't know if you followed the case of Morrison versus Olson, where former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia famously dissented alone, warning against the creation of a fourth branch of government, unaccountable bureaucracies with the power to influence political outcomes, a government of laws and not of men, he wrote, means that our rulers are bound by the law, just as the governed are. Yet here we are in 2025, and we look back at a moment when our rulers were the law, when intelligence agencies were pressured into revising their own conclusions to align with political imperatives. This happened in 2024. And and this is not a conspiracy theory. Let me just share that with you. This is the documented history of the modern American states. It is what happens when ideology becomes the lens through which evidence is interpreted and when political expedience outweighs constitutional restraint. And now with Trump back in the White House, you see what is happening. Not because of what Trump has done so far, but because of what he might uncover and what he's uncovering now of what happened in 2016 when you have access to all these files. And now all of a sudden, the narrative changes. Talk about that, Patrice.
It's breathtaking. The fact that sometimes I love a good thriller movie that involves, our intelligence agencies and spies. And very often the cover-up is not just the spies on the ground. There's always someone in government, and particularly someone very high up the food chain, who is orchestrating all of these pawns in different and moving pieces around, tying up loose ends, if you know what a loose end happens to that person. But this is exactly what we've seen with information, declassified documents going back to 2016, right before the transition when President Trump's first administration came in. We saw the orchestration, the use of discredited information paid for, opposition research paid for by one of the candidates running, become then the source of information and of legal filings against the Trump campaign and people involved, and it's spun out of control. And I think it's feeding the Russia collusion story, which is now discredited. For everyone who doesn't know, Russia did not lead to President Trump getting elected in 2016. But it feeds into the larger idea that not only our intelligence agencies, but some of our very other federal agencies using information, whether it's the manipulation of it or the suppression of it, to control the narrative and to control what people believe. We saw this again in 2020, Armstrong, with COVID and all of from the origins of COVID to whether ivermectin is used to deworm horses versus being a legitimate way to help cure or help people deal with COVID symptoms. And all of that information, if it was controlled, and anyone who believed otherwise, they were suppressed, they were manipulated. The social media also played a role, but I'm focused on federal government and the power of higher ups to determine who and what people were led to believe. And then finally, we get declassified information, we get hearings, we get reports, and we finally suddenly realize that so many people have been manipulated, which is why now Gallup looks at people's trust in the media. Only a third trust the media. And really, the trust has plummeted among Republicans, I believe, because Republican voters have access to a lot more different opinions than I think a lot of left-leaning Democrat voters are. If you're only getting your news from Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, and MSNBC, you are getting a very controlled narrative and not the full picture and not the full scope of what's happened in the past.
Rob, this is it in a nutshell. This is the nightmare scenario for the deep state. It was not necessarily a second Trump term, but a reckoning with the truth. The emails, the memos, all that stuff that was redacted. That is what's coming full circle now. And the fact is, and I've read much of what Tulsi Gabbard has released. And let me tell you something. The Russians did not want Donald Trump to win. They felt Hillary Clinton was compromised. Oh, absolutely. They felt they would rather deal with the devil they knew than the devil they did not know. No one wants to talk about Loretta Lynch and how she did everything she could to make sure that Hillary Clinton did not face the music for those emails. People forget about what James Comey did about a month before the election, and the fact that John Brennan was the architect, and all those things are in there. Look, the emails, the memos, the redacted reports, they may not remain buried for much longer. Rob Bluey.
Well, and Armstrong, I think it was a brilliant move on the part of President Trump and Caroline Leavitt to immediately declare that this administration would be the most transparent in history. And they have followed through on that promise and done exactly what you just talked about. They have declassified a lot of this information that the American people deserved to see years ago, and now we're finally getting our hands on it. And I'm talking about information that is decades old, like the JFK and MLK files and things that happened within the last decade, as Patrice was just talking about with the Russia collusion hoax. And so now that the American people can read this information in these lengthy reports, and they don't necessarily have to believe that narrative that is being spun by legacy media outlets, they are seeing the truth with their own eyes. And I think it's a revealing thing, and it's really encouraging on the part of so many in this administration that there's a significant interest. I mean, you've seen it with Jeffrey Epstein, you're now seeing it with Russia collusion. The American people, I think, have been craving the opportunity to delve in and see what exactly has been going on with their own government. One final point on this, and that is, so much of how Washington works is you have a deep state actor have information, as we've seen disclosed within the past week, take that information to a news outlet, likely a friendly news outlet that would be spinning the narrative in a positive direction, in this case, a direction that Barack Obama or his associates would want, and put that information out. And where I think, and Patrice made this point earlier, where those news organizations have failed is that they never come back and correct the record. They don't say that they screwed up and maybe were manipulated by the government or some deep state actor, and that's why you've seen the trust plummet.
And let me just say this. What matters is that Americans were lied to by their own government, systematically, persistently, and with great sophistication. As my hero, Tom Sowell, has often warned, it is hard to imagine a more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. Patricia.
Yes, the price needs to be paid. People have won Pulitzer Prizes off of their reporting on Russian collusion. People have won, so many awards and accolades. I'd like to see some of these award-providing bodies decide to strip some of these reporters and journalists of these accolades. I think, some of the very companies that they're still working for need to really decide whether, if truth and reconciliation is going to be part of the healing process, that they start the healing by calling out their own reporters who got it wrong and actually sitting down and saying, okay, we need to do a better job of this. We saw a taste of this with Jake Tapper's book when he exposed what happened with the cover-up over Biden's mental decline last year. Again, have heads really rolled? Have we seen anybody pay a greater price in the news media for their complicity in the cover-up? No. And so I'm hopeful that as more information continues to roll out and we see just how much the media was complicit either in running with these stories or suppressing them, like the Hunter Biden's laptop, for example, that there is some accountability.
Russian misinformation. The media called it Russian misinformation, and they knew they were lying. I mean, come on. So the question is now, Rob, is whether anyone will be held accountable or whether, once again, we will look the other way while the powerful write a different version of history, one where the truth is not merely inconvenient, but disposable.
I'm not optimistic. I think, as Patrice indicated, I mean, the chances of the Pulitzer Committee revoking any of the prizes is probably pretty low, even though those stories have turned out to be completely false. Now, when it comes to those who were in government, I think that they were very clever based on, and Armstrong, you read the documents yourself, so you could tell me if I'm misreading something here, but they were very clever to cover their tracks. And that's why I don't know that you'll have...
let me stop you. Let me interrupt you.
Okay.
Let me tell you what was clever. The forensics does not lie. They knew they were lying. They knew there was no Russian collusion. They were very uncomfortable in what they were being forced to do. So guess what they did? They created a record where there would be no refuting, no memory loss of exactly what they were told to do, why they were told to do it, where it came from. No, because for their own conscience and for history's sake, they actually were very transparent. And what they did not calculate, that if Donald Trump were to win again, all this would become public. They acquitted themselves, brother.
Yes, that is true, but you actually need the Department of Justice or members of Congress to have the courage to go after them and hold them accountable, and I think that is the question.
Mike Johnson holds that power, and he claimed that he was going to be transparent. We know he was not sincere. This is why the Democrats can play gamemanship with him now, because listen, if the Democrats in 4 years with Biden in power had anything on Trump in those Epstein files and they had the same access, you best believe they would have deployed it to destroy him. There is nothing in those files. And what the Democrats are doing is gaming Mike Johnson and the Republicans because they know they're not sincere about fully releasing all that information, force it to be done. Come on, let's tell the truth here, okay? There's nothing in those files. The Democrats had it. There was nothing there. There was nothing to deploy against Trump. They had the files.
Certainly, Merrick Garland did not hold back in going after plenty of other people, including practicing Catholics and parents who were showing up at school board meetings. So you would think that he would go after Donald Trump if he had information in those Epstein files on him. Armstrong, I think you make a great point there. I've not heard a single explanation from Democrats explaining to the American people why Merrick Garland, if he did possess this, didn't disclose it over the 4 years that he was Attorney General. And then as when it comes to the accountability, part of this, I think that ultimately, this is where, I mean, you saw this past week, the grand jury, the judge in Florida said that was not going to release the information from that grand jury. So, I mean, there's always going to be obstacles in the way. You just need to plow through, and you need to make sure that those who are responsible, whether it be, John Brennan or even Barack Obama himself, answer those tough questions.
You know, Shay, my Florida director, has given me this. You know, I get carried away because I'm enjoying this conversation. Listen, Patricia, Rob, much respect for your journalistic integrity, pursuers of the truth, and still giving our institution the credibility that's necessary. Because let me tell you, the fourth estate is necessary in this nation. Let's not ever downplay our importance in the role that we play in this country. Thank you both for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion. And that is, there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. So Joshua Philipp is an investigative reporter in New York with the Epoch Times. We welcome you to our airwaves. And of course, Andrew Donaldson is a commentator with Young Voices. So, Andrew, of what we have been facing, and boy, let me tell you, every week seems like a year in America when you're in the press. I'm telling you, I don't see how you keep up with it. It's just so much. Do you think social media algorithms are the new gatekeepers of truth? And if so, who programs the gatekeepers?
Well, personally, I just signed up for culinary courses at the community college, so I'm actually doing stuff non-political just to keep my soul clean so I can do this during the day job. But the thing about the algorithms and the social media is there's two sides to it. And one side is obviously a unfair partner and a bad faith actor. We know algorithms are programmed by somebody. It's not the computer did it. Somebody programmed it. Even a large language model, which is what AI has been pitching about, is somebody puts that stuff in there and somebody should be gatekeeping it. So yes, they push it for commercial reasons, ideological reasons whatsoever, things like that. But the other part of it is always us. Remember, the algorithm responds to us. When you put on that political story and you were looking at the crockpots on Amazon.com and now crockpots are all over your sports feed, that's part of the algorithm, but that's the part you had a little bit of control over. Now it's annoying, but we have to clean up our own timelines too. So part of it is starting where we're at with watching what we intake, especially people like us where we have to intake stuff we don't like and we don't agree with because that's the job and it kind of screws up your personal time online. But everybody has to be aware of the world we live in. It's dirty water. We all have to swim in it, but there's both sides of that. There's the bad faith people programming it, controlling it, and gatekeeping it. That's one side of the story. And then there's how we react to it. That's the other side of the story. We don't like to talk about that side of it, though.
So, Joshua, while our country pays this exorbitant sum of money to clean up its minuscule percentage of global climate change, a UN court has decided that the largest nations must pay for climate damage or face healthy penalties. Now, let me just break this down. Of course, the United States and Europe will be the only one held to that standard. And meanwhile, China and India, the world's largest polluters, the nations whose pollution makes the U.S. look like absolutely nothing, will continue to ignore this UN climate goals while the U.S. gets the finger pointed at us. I mean, these international climate treaties to many people are just a joke. They're meaningless, and the only nations that have signed into them are nations that won't be affected by it, and the nations that actually cause climate issues can safely ignore them.
Yeah, no, it's wild stuff because, you know, I've done a lot of research on the Chinese Communist Party, a lot of research on what's happening there. Pollution from China is so bad it reaches the United States. The U.S. West Coast suffers from it. Countries, you know, South Korea, Japan, they really suffer from it. The water pollution in China, horrible. The soil pollution, horrible. They're having a food crisis, which is why they have to buy it up in other countries, which is why they're buying up farmland, for example. Even what they do in the oceans, fishing and really destructive fishing practices has destroyed entire ecosystems, which is why Chinese fishing ships have to push down all the way into like the Philippines and why they're going even to like South America. It's because they destroyed the ecosystems. Now, when it comes to these international agreements, look, I mean, I grew up hunting, I grew up fishing, I grew up surfing. Like, I love it. I would consider myself an environmentalist, but more of a conventional type. When you have these international agreements that ironically don't punish the worst offenders and even have just no limits on them, while you restrict others, the effect of it, you know, when Trump was talking about the Paris Climate Accord, the effect of it would have been that you would cripple the American energy industry while allowing China and other countries to dominate it when they're the worst polluters. You know, the real irony, too, is that even coal plants in first world countries, coal plants made by the United States, are actually pretty clean. But the coal plants they have in China are not. I think that if we wanted to have actual clean energy, we would unleash American energy because we can do it cleaner than just about everybody else can, and Europe. And that would fix a lot of the pollution, you know, as ironic as that all is.
Let me just stay with you a minute. What about the announcement and the 15% tariff with Japan? Where are we with the tariffs and with the Canadians? It's not as much in the media now. When it's not much in the media now, that means we're negotiating.
Yeah, so the tariffs are not looking so good for Canada. They got hit with 30%. And if you remember, Justin Trudeau was saying, he was even saying 10% would destroy their economy. Aside from that, Trump is trying to bring back the factories. He's also trying to bring back, claw back some of the industries. Major Canadian exports, it's a lot of it's timber, a lot of it's energy. They control the energy for 3 states, mainly including New York. And Trump doesn't want that to happen anymore. So If we go back in time, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, that sent a lot of our factories to Canada and Mexico. Trump wants to bring those back. With Japan, post-World War II, we allowed them to tariff us, 100% tariffs on American cars. And, you know, part of that was nice. We're trying to help them rebuild their country. But they've kept a lot of that in place ever since. And so while we do import from them quite a bit, when we want to sell to them, they tariff us quite a bit. So Trump has also hit them pretty hard with tariffs. They're trying to negotiate it down because they're also investing now in American industry, and they believe that some of those investments should offset the cost of tariffs.
You know, so, Andrew, with assault against ICE agents, did you know it's up 830%? It's no wonder that resources are now being put into finding and bringing these criminals to justice.
Yeah, and that's part of the plan, too. Remember, when Trump first came into office, there was only actually about 6,000 ICE agents dovetailed for actually going out in the street and arresting people. That's a very small number. So the more you do it, the more you get it on TV, the more you push for it. Now we know the massive funding from the One Big Beautiful Bill that's coming in that makes it one of the largest law enforcement agencies. You're going to see more and more of this. And as they go in the field and push this issue further and further, you're going to see more and more pushback. The violence is always a problem. You don't want to ever see violence against law enforcement. This is something that has to be dealt with. This brings up part of the problem with trying to do enforcement, though. On TV, enforcement always looks ugly. There's no way to make it look pretty when you're apprehending people. And that brings you to the ICE tactics and some of the ways they're doing this and some of the ways they're rounding these folks up. But this is what the administration wants. They don't only want the policy, they want the TV show of it. The problem is that's also going to put the people in the line of fire, the ICE agents themselves, in harm's way, and also the public that gets caught in the middle of people that are bad faith actors that attack ICE, regular protesters that just want to genuinely protest peacefully. And then we've seen over and over again, those protests get hijacked by people that want to do violence and fight with the officials and cops and the ICE agents and everybody else and cause trouble. Those are the people that need cracked down on, but that's a hot mess we got to slice through to get to all of it. It makes ugly TV, it makes messy policy, but that's also part of the problem with trying to fix a problem that's gone on for far too long.
I don't know if you saw the report where this event organizer was offered $20 million by a private organization just to organize protests, fake protests, to protest anything that Donald Trump is doing, particularly when it comes to ICE. What do you say about that? Is there anything that can be done? Because people are, I mean, it has nothing to do with principle. These people are being paid to just show up to cause disruption.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one specifically, but we have a long track record. And let's just go to the social media age of the last 16, 17 years, for example. If you look close enough, you know that these mass protests, and it doesn't matter what it is, an immigration protest, a Supreme Court protest, Black Lives Matter protest, abortion protest, you'll start seeing organizer-wise a lot of the same people over and over and over again because they can run nonprofits and it's a money stream. There are such a thing as professional protesters, and there's also such a thing as what we call in the movie business, you call them extra protesters. You go into a municipality, you put out on the gig economy to hire some folks, and people will show up and protest just like they hold signs in front of stores having sales. There is an ecosystem that is just professional protesting. Now, again, there's First Amendment concerns there you want to watch, but if you're doing interstate protests across state lines that are causing violence and trouble, I think that's something legally, that's how you start looking at that, and that's how you weed out people that honestly are doing protests. There's nothing wrong with running a 501c3 because you don't want to uncork that can of worms, but people that are crossing state lines to do violence, yeah, there's something that officials really need to get a crackdown on, and there's plenty of case law that back you up to shut that down in a hurry with severe penalties.
You know, I don't understand how inhuman can you get assaulting and throwing dangerous objects at people. I mean, what kind of people are these? Where do they come from? What happens if they're found guilty? If they plead guilty, you just got to lock them up, make an example of them, and all of these criminals should be. These are criminals. These are the people that you need to go after. I want to come back to Joshua's wheelbarrow. You know, the Trump EPA Joshua is now saying that greenhouse don't endanger people.
Yep. So that's the narrative coming out from the Trump side. And there actually is science to back that up. On that point, you have science on both sides saying things totally different, right? So if you talk about some organizations and their research saying that greenhouse gases are not actually harmful to the environment, their narrative is that actually what it creates is a greenhouse effect that is actually good for plants. They say we're living in kind of a golden age, and that the warming of the planet happens in different parts of human history. They would even point to, for example, that you have archaeological artifacts and so on, trees growing in places where there's now covered in ice. You have, for example, the remnants of grapes in northern parts of England where they don't grow these days because it's too cold. And archaeological artifacts do demonstrate the world used to be warmer. And if you go by even the tests they've done, the golden ages for human society tends to be during the warmer phases of it. The downfall, the declines tend to happen when it's colder. That's when you have plagues. That's when you have disasters and other things. And so the Trump administration, I think they're kind of turning the narrative on its head, suggesting that, yeah, the climate may be warming, but no, this is not some apocalyptic event.
And on that note, we'll be back with much more. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Let me welcome Andrew and Joshua back. Andrew, this week Harvard was in court, and the trial over the major funding cuts of Harvard University by the Trump administration is underway. Harvard, which has an endowment over $50 billion, untaxed, by the way, is fighting tooth and nail against the president so they can retain their, again, untaxed $2.6 billion in federal funding. Some people look at this pretty simple. Harvard and much of the elite schools across the nation have abused their long coattails to get what they want and do what they want, but no longer with Trump. Funding isn't the only thing that Trump has the authority to do. This is just a tip of the iceberg if Harvard really wants to go down the path of fighting Trump. What are the consequences? Even more money and resources they're going to have to spend. Your thoughts, Andrew?
The important part is the last part you said. Harvard's the one fighting this. Harvard is the avatar for the rest of higher education, especially the Ivy League system and the upper echelons of higher education. They're the ones that can fight back, and they have others rallying behind them, watching how this goes. But we actually probably should back up and understand that this isn't so much a war of attrition as it is a negotiation. There's that word again. This is very much going to probably wind up getting settled. We know the Columbia settlement just came out of $220 million, I believe it was. This is a push-pull of power, and the higher education, especially the Ivy Leagues like Harvard, who have the endowments of GDP small nations, have pretty much been untouchable in a lot of ways. So this is something that somebody like Donald Trump and the MAGA movement that supports him very much wants to punch some holes in for the future. This is something that a lot of powerful people behind Trump and behind Harvard on both sides of this is laying out the landscape for the next 20, 30, 40 years because higher education is changing rapidly. The financial dynamics of higher education is changing rapidly. This is a negotiation over what the future of higher education is, who has the power of it, and who gets to regulate it. That's the way to look at this story past just the initial court case we're dealing with.
Joshua, I'm in the United Kingdom this weekend, and Birmingham and London. And what's fascinating is that the United Kingdom may make one of the most politically motivated and disastrous moves of all time. They are literally, before the next elections, this government plans to reduce the voting age from 18 to 16. Is that madness? I mean, let's be real here. You should have a say in who leads our nation when you understand what's at stake. 16-year-olds are still in high school or become a proxy of their parents. They are highly impressionable and subject to pressure from their teachers who, generally speaking, lean left. This is not about conservatives or liberals, by the way. It's about winning elections. It's about determining who the country actually believes should lead them. Young kids, in many people's opinion, don't yet know that answer. And listen, Joshua, if it's in Europe, it's coming soon to America, because many people believe important decisions like these should be left to adults. Is that a fact or fiction?
I'd say it's a fact, and I think we're getting further and further away from what the country used to be, where, it used to be you have a stake in the country, right? You have to own land. I wouldn't go that far, saying you have to be a landowner to vote. But I do think people tend to change on how they view big government when they start paying taxes. And I would say for a lot of people that's the flip, right? When you're in college, when you're in high school, you might see things very differently because you're not really looking at you being impacted by the outer world. You're not really looking at how the government affects you. You're looking at opinions, you're looking at emotion, you're looking at online influencers or whatever it is the kids look at these days, and that's the basis of their politics. They're not looking at lived experience of what policies mean when put into practice. So I do believe that once you get into the once you get into the workforce, once you start getting out there and you have to pay taxes and deal with regulations, and you've gotten to see firsthand how there's a trickle-down effect with everything. You start to, I think, move away from that type of thinking, and you don't really want totalitarian government. You want, as people get older, I think they tend to want smaller government.
I know, Andrew, you mentioned that Harvard is doing the negotiations, and we may be close to a settlement. I know Alan Dershowitz said this recently, but guess what? Columbia is paying $200 million to the federal government, and they're suspending student protesters. Now they'll be able to get the $400 million. That's where they are. They've wrapped this up. What do you glean from that? What happened to your audio?
My fault. You're a better businessman than me, so you explain to me. I think that's $180 million covered there if they pay that amount and go away money to get back to the other money. And then again, next year and the year after that and year after that, they're trying to get their fundraising back. Columbia is a very interesting place because if you actually go there, it's kind of like the Vatican. It's in New York City, but it's not of New York City. You go through 2 entry control points to get in there. It's very isolated from the rest of the city in a lot of ways. And it's traditionally been a very heavy place for research engineering stuff. So this is another one of those cases where we really need to get into where is that going to? Where's that research going to? And where's all that money going to? So $220 million is a lot of money to us. That's probably a go away amount of money to them if they start looking out over the next 5, 10, 15 years to make this mess go away. But if you look at their actual policies they're doing where they're cracking down on the protesters, they're expelling people, the people that got violent, the ringleaders, people who have been at that school for 8, 9, 10 years and are still at that school for whatever reason for no discernible purpose but to protest against it are getting put out now. If they had just done that to start with, they probably could have avoided all the rest of this, even if you don't agree with the tactics. So it feels like we're kind of getting back to a level where we actually made some progress here, even though it was a little ugly.
A media question for you, Joshua. Will AI and automation enhance or erode journalistic integrity in the days, months, and years ahead?
I think it will erode it for the most part. And I'd say there's 2 sides to it. On one side is AI will never replace original reporting. Because AI, all it can do is take what is out there and kind of, reorganize it or regurgitate it. It's always going to need something to pull from. And so journalists who go out and interview members of Congress or do investigative research or put together things that are not yet on the internet, that will never go away. But what I do think it will replace is people who, take existing work and just repurpose it. You do have a lot of desktop journalists these days. You have a lot of people who just take other people's articles and rewrite them. It'll probably get rid of that. The other problem you're going to have is that AI, the way it's being programmed is it doesn't look at certain media. It's told to ignore certain narratives. And so the people programming AI can affect the entire kind of downstream of the way the news industry works by limiting which media it can pull from. And so you could have it so that the narratives of just the establishment media become the only breadth of what AI can actually look at. And that will affect a lot of things. That'll affect research papers, that'll affect students, that'll affect anybody who becomes dependent on AI for anything.
You know, Andrew, this is a doozy. French President Macron is suing Candace Owens.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this?
I wish I hadn't, but yes, I have.
And you know what? As a broadcaster, I have been following Candace's stories and what she's been putting out about his wife and questioning. But he's suing her.
Yeah.
The president of France. What should we take from that?
Well, there's a couple things. There's a divide. Like if I do UK media, there's things on UK media I cannot say that I can say on anything in America. They are very strict on their libel laws. If I go on UK media and talk about even something like the P. Diddy trial we just did, I would have to say allegedly right up until the moment he gets convicted. They're real strict about libel laws and slander and things like that in Europe. So the mentality's a little different. But yeah, you're the head of a country, and Candace Owens is a highly problematic, very controversial. Now she's mostly in the podcasting realm and no further. So if you're the head of one of the major countries on earth, you really need to ignore this and let it go. The fact that he didn't is also very Macron, though, if you followed his
But he's
career
doing it
over the
for
last few years.
Bridget. Come on, he's doing it for his wife. You know why he's doing this. Come on,
the
please.
story of his wife that is accurate, and putting aside the craziness about her gender and all that nonsense, you know, this is a woman that was his teacher in school. You can go read about that story, how they met in the first place. There's plenty of salacious there.
But
if you
it's
just
the
wanna stick to
allegations
the
that
truth.
she's a man. Come on, that's ridiculous. Even
Yeah,
I admit, that's crazy.
Look, she's somebody that I don't want to
You
have
crossed
anything
the
to do
line.
with,
You crossed the
frankly.
line.
But he needs to ignore it as the head of a country
She's not
and not
ignoring
get
it.
fired to it because he's elevating her up more than he's bringing
Obviously, it's having an impact, Joshua. He's not ignoring it.
Yeah.
He's not.
Yeah.
Joshua, I'll
this
get your
is,
input on this. We have got a minute.
Well, we'll see. I think the basis they're using to sue her, because normally you can't really sue Americans from France, but I think they're saying because she has dual citizenship. I believe her husband is British.
That's right,
They'll
he's
probably go
British.
through the British courts for it. And as you mentioned, they're a lot more strict there. So we'll see how they handle it.
And also, let's be clear, that's very hurtful and very painful. Let's get to the bottom line. I mean, imagine. But anyhow, Joshua, Andrew, Patricia, Rob Bluey, WGLA 24/7, Howard Sturk Holdings, thank you so much for a very lively, informative, and in-depth conversation today. I'm Armstrong Williams. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.